All right, everybody, so today we're going to finish up the Reformation, talk about it spreading outside of Europe and some of the long-term impacts of it, and as well, let's talk about, hey, how did the Catholic Church deal with all of this? All right, now there's lots of different guys that I could talk about, and we really don't have time to get into it, so if Luther's kind of like 1A, we're going to go like 1B or number 2 is this guy by the name of John Calvin. He's got the cool hat, and he's giving you kind of the thumbs and finger up. Or saying that you're a loser. One of those two. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. You figure it out. So he lived from 1508 to 1565. He was from a wealthy middle class family. His father had actually been excommunicated from the church when he was a young man because of some type of tithing issue. We're not exactly sure, but not really good. He actually was a priest for a little while, then studied law, then went back to being a priest. And in 1553, he meets some French Lutherans, and Luther is going to be tremendously influential on him. He is really going to kind of go wholeheartedly into this idea that the Catholic Church's teachings aren't really the way to go anymore, although he himself is not going to become a Lutheran. But he starts to become very outspoken against the Church. And in France, that was not a good idea because the King of France, Francis I, because there's not enough Francis in that, often jailed or even killed Protestants. So he is going to go on the run, and he is going to go to Geneva. And in Geneva, he really develops his theology of what we often refer to as Calvinism. And his beliefs are really going to, be centralized and kind of formed in Geneva. And the key thing is he will eventually come to rule Geneva as a bit of a theocracy. Now, what he believed in was the idea of predestination, that man can't add anything to himself to get salvation or go to heaven, and God has predetermined whether or you will not go to heaven. Now, the belief behind this was that you're not capable of following God on your own, that you need God to help you lead the way. Now, a lot of people are like, well, I'm not exactly sure how that works, and I have some more details in the notes about the 5 points of Calvinism. But the idea here is that by being a very religious and kind of orthodox person, okay, that you yourself can show that you have actually been picked by God. And this is really, really important. And that you can study the Bible and really need to dedicate your life to God. In Geneva, what this ended up becoming was that the people that ran Calvinism would become known as the elect. And those elect came to run the city. And that everything was very rigid and stern, and there are laws actually against like singing and outward expressions of joy. That you need to be in church all the time. And it was a very stern and kind of a harsh view of religion. Geneva itself would be the bastion of that. You see actually a statue in Geneva today. It's built to Protestantism, and here is John Calvin right here. Here is his where he was buried. And Calvinism is going to be huge. People are really going to like it, not much, I think, for the predestination part, but the idea of wholly dedicating yourself to God. And in many ways, you'll have people kind of want to run their life in a theocratic manner. Now, the two groups that are really, really going to be huge here are the Huguenots in France, and we're going to talk about them moving forward because they're going to do all sorts of crazy stuff in France. But more importantly, to say our country, the Puritans or the Pilgrims were Calvinists as well. And aside from Lutherans, the largest group of people that end up converting, if you will, end up being Calvinists. So John Calvin, incredible influence, and we'll continue to get into that in class. Now, the other big shoe to drop would happen in England. Now, early on, King Henry VIII of England, who was the king at the time, there he is right there looking fabulous, um, he was known as the defender of the faith. He really was going to be strong supporter of Catholicism and Leo X, but eventually he's going to have a problem. In the year 1527, Henry was married to a woman by the name of Catherine of Aragon, and Catherine was a terrible woman because she only gave him a daughter. That daughter was Mary, and he did not believe that Mary should ever rule, and so he wanted to get an annulment. Not a divorce, an annulment. And he goes to Pope Clement VII, who is the guy pictured on the bottom left, like, hey, I think we need to change this. I think I need to become, the king who has a male heir, and I need you to annul my marriage. And the reason I need you to annul my marriage is that Catherine was married to my brother before he died, so it should be good. And the fact that he had a mistress on the side, Anne Boleyn, so he had it all set up. Clement's like, no. Oh no, we're not having any of that. I appreciate everything that you did, but we can't do that. We do not have divorce. And so Henry, in a childish rage, says, okay, we're going to change it. So what happens is that he gets the English Parliament to pass a law called the Act of Supremacy. And in the Act of Supremacy, which is kind of crazy, the English Parliament declares that they are actually no longer Catholic, and that they create the Anglican Church, better known as the Church of England, with King Henry as the head. The basic ideas, to be all honest with you, is that they're pretty much the same thing as Catholicism, except no longer will they listen to the Pope. And the main functionary that will run the church will actually be the Archbishop of Canterbury, and on the right here you see Canterbury Cathedral, which is kind of the center of it all. Now, Henry gets very excited. He sends Catherine off to a monastery, and she will die there, and he gets married to Anne, and they have a child, and my God, it's another girl, and he can't have any of that. And so what he ends up doing is accusing her of adultery and chopping her head off. Yes, it happens. He then gets married to a woman by the name of Jane Seymour, who has a son, Edward. Yay, a boy! We'll talk about it later, but Jane dies in childbirth. He's a king. He needs to be married. So once again, he's going to marry a woman by the name of Anne of Cleves. You don't need to know it. That one gets annulled. Gets married to another Catherine Howard, because he's only allowed to marry mostly women named Catherine or Anne. And then Catherine Howard, she was an adulteress, sure, I guess. She gets her head chopped off. Then he marries a woman by the name of Catherine Parr, who manages to survive him. Now, the huge thing here is not as much that he had 6 wives and they either went to nunneries or annulled, or they got their heads chopped off and they were all named Catherine because it's weird and creepy, but that Henry broke the England from the church. The church, in many cases here, guys, is kind of broken by this. Their political power is in trouble. They're really going to have problems trying to show their power in the future. And in the end, it's just all done. And what you end up happening here is that you get continued breaks from the church. If you look at our little family tree here, we have the Catholic Church and then the Eastern Orthodox Church, and they kind of do their own thing. Then you get, boom, the Lutherans and then the Anglican Church, and the Anglicans give us the Congregationals and the Baptists and the Episcopalians and the Methodists, and the Methodists you get the Salvation Army, I know, crazy, and the Church of God in Indiana, which I never even knew about. And then the Congregational gives us the Quakers and the United Church of Christ, and then the Baptist gives the Seventh-day Adventists and the Assembly of God and the Church of God, which is actually in Tennessee. And then over here you get the Reformed Church, which is kind of Lutheran, but not quite Lutheran. And that's the Scottish and the Anabaptists and the Presbyterians. And we get the Mennonites and the Amish, yay! And the Evangelicals. And then I don't even have on here, we get the Calvinists, which are like way over here. And then the Calvinists, they're going to do their own things. And it's just craziness. So what's the church do? Well, initially, the church wasn't really good with it. They did the Inquisition, and we know how that all worked, that they stamp out heresy and all sorts of stuff like that. And that really didn't work out really well. Then they tried to control knowledge, and they give this index of prohibited books that actually lasts until 1966, which will have famous authors on it like Martin Luther and John Calvin, but also Thomas Hobbes and Victor Hugo, Immanuel Kant, Marx, Milton, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Francis Bacon, Copernicus, Galileo, the guy that wrote 50 Shades of Grey. All that stuff is just, we just can't have it. And in the end, none of that actually works. But we do get some guys that want to fix it. Probably one of the most famous is a man by the name of Ignatius of Loyola, who creates a new holy order of monks called the Jesuits. He was actually a Spanish knight who was active during the Inquisition, was wounded and read a book about the saints and realized that Catholicism needed to kind of get back to its roots and spread the message. And so he is going to start a group, again, called the Jesuits, that they're basically going to be teachers. The ideas of them is that to act as missionaries and spread Christ's word and the word of Catholicism through education and enlightenment. And this is hugely important. They are going to be so successful, particularly in the New World, which we will be talking about, as well as they'll be very big on opening up schools. They'll open up schools both in Europe and, more importantly, in many cases in the United States, which I'll talk about. But the Jesuits really helped to bring everything back together and have kind of this beacon of hope, if you will. And there's lots of different Jesuit schools in the United States of America. Some of the famous ones are Gonzaga over in Washington, St. Joe's, which of course is in Philly, and probably the most prestigious one is Georgetown. Some of the other ones are like Boston University, Santa Clara, Fordham, Marquette. Pretty incredible. So you have a long impact of the Protestant Reformation being influential in the United States because you have many Protestants come here, but you also have this idea of Catholic education. Finally, the Catholics are going to fix some things with the Council of Trent. Pope Paul III comes into play, and he is going to have a council that lasts from 1545 to 1563. Now, it doesn't go on for that whole time. It's kind of off and on. But the whole idea is like, okay, the church is a mess. How do I fix it? And so what they're going to get out of this are a few things. One, they do condemn the beliefs of the Protestants. They do not support the Protestants, but no longer are they going to try to go like kill Protestants, okay? If you want to be Protestant, fine, you're out. We don't think you're right, but go away. That the church interpretation of the Bible is important and that they're going to continue to practice that. They do focus on the divinity of Christ, which is going to be really, really important. And because of the idea of the divinity of Christ, they're going to bring back that idea of good works with faith, how Jesus helped the poor, that you need to get out there and help the poor. And actually, if you look in the United States of America, Catholic Charities, one of the largest charities worth over $1 billion. They're going to focus a lot on sacraments, most important that actually being the wedding, and all weddings must be through the church. But, again, Eucharist and baptism and really making a lot of these sacraments celebrations. Bishops are going to have to live in the land that they're in charge of and be responsible for it and not collect money anymore. And that they're going to open up ecclesiastical schools, and that in order for you to be a priest, you need to go to school. I actually know a guy that is right now going through divinity school, and those guys are in school till they're like, good 25, 26 years old. And so in the end, what's going to end up happening is that the church is going to shift away from strong power, if you will, to actually focusing more on the message. Now, this is not to mean that they're not going to get involved. They're going to there's going to be a crusade called against Elizabeth of France, and you're going to have the Inquisition in Spain, and then you're also going to get wars between Catholic and non-Catholic nations, and groups of Catholics and groups of Protestants. But what you can get out of the Protestant Reformation is that the power of the Catholic Church is going to be changed forever, and that the church is going to have to go in a different direction. It is going to be incredibly influential socially, but their political influence is pretty much at an end. Okay, guys, let's watch this. We'll have our comments and questions, and I'll see you tomorrow.